Hey everyone. Welcome back to 5 Minutes Learning, where we break down complex business case studies into simple and actionable insights. In today's video, we're diving deep into an extraordinary company, SpaceX, and how it used economies of scale to revolutionize space access. Now, you might be wondering, why is this relevant for MBA students or business leaders? Well, understanding SpaceX's strategy can teach us valuable lessons about cost efficiency, innovation, and the future of commercial space travel. On February 6, 2018, the world watched in awe as SpaceX's Falcon Heavy launched a Tesla Roadster into space. What seemed like a spectacle was actually a historic business move, demonstrating how SpaceX reduced costs and made space launches more affordable. Today, we'll explore how they achieved this through smart use of economies of scale. Overview of SpaceX and the case study. Founded by Elon Musk in 2002, SpaceX aimed to make space travel affordable and, ultimately, enable humans to live on Mars. However, the challenge Musk faced was astronomical, quite literally. The cost of launching rockets to space was sky-high. At one point, his Mars Oasis project failed due to exorbitant costs. But instead of giving up, Musk did something remarkable. He created SpaceX to disrupt the space industry itself. With the help of COO Gwynne Shotwell, Musk focused on cutting costs and making reusable rockets. Fast forward a decade, and SpaceX captured 30% of the commercial launch market and slashed costs to orbit by 18 times. Falcon Heavy, the most powerful operational rocket, cost a fraction of what competitors charged. Let's break down the problem SpaceX faced, just like in any business scenario. In the early 2000s, launching rockets into space was incredibly expensive, so much so that it was typically only done by governments. No private company had managed to make space launches affordable, which was a major roadblock for anyone wanting to explore space, let alone Mars. Now, let's talk about the solution. SpaceX didn't just build rockets, it focused on economies of scale. In simple terms, economies of scale mean that as you produce more units of something, the cost per unit decreases. For SpaceX, this meant reusing rocket components, especially with their Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy models. The more rockets they launched, the cheaper each launch became. By creating reusable rockets, SpaceX drastically reduced the costs of getting to space. Let's tie this into a real-time example that you might be more familiar with: Tesla. Tesla, another company led by Musk, used economies of scale in its car manufacturing process. Early on, Tesla cars were expensive, but as the company ramped up production, the cost per car dropped, making electric vehicles more affordable for the average consumer. SpaceX's approach was similar. They increased production, in this case, rocket launches, to bring down costs. Understanding how companies like Tesla and SpaceX leverage economies of scale can help MBA students apply these principles to other industries. Remember this key lesson: sometimes, initial investment in innovation can seem expensive, but if done right, it can lead to massive cost savings in the future. SpaceX's reusable rocket technology paid off, allowing them to offer launches at prices their competitors couldn't match. In summary, SpaceX not only changed the space industry but also provided a roadmap for how companies can use economies of scale and innovation to reduce costs. The company's vision of making space travel affordable is becoming a reality, and its success teaches us valuable business lessons, whether you're aiming for the stars or trying to optimize operations here on Earth. Now, here's something to think about. As SpaceX continues to innovate, will other companies follow its lead in industries we haven't even considered yet? Let us know what you think in the comments below. With that being said, now let's get into in-depth analysis of this case study. History of the U.S. commercial launch industry. To understand how SpaceX revolutionized space access, it's important to look at the history of the U.S. commercial launch industry. It all started during the space race, a period of intense competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to dominate space exploration. 1. The birth of the space industry, the space race era. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, into orbit. This event sparked a sense of urgency in the U.S. The launch made American policymakers question their own country's technological edge, and the business of launching rockets officially began. To address this technological gap, Congress passed the National Aeronautics and Space Act in 1958, establishing NASA. NASA's goal was to propel the U.S. forward in space exploration. Shortly after, the U.S. saw a series of spaceflight successes, such as Alan Shepard's suborbital flight and Neil Armstrong's historic moon landing in 1969. 2. Transition to a commercial space market. After NASA's success in the moon landing, the U.S. faced a pivotal moment. The Apollo program was winding down, and the demand for lunar missions decreased. At this point, NASA made a major decision that would affect the commercial space industry for decades. They shifted focus to the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle was designed to be partially reusable, and NASA intended to monopolize U.S. space launches. However, this decision sidelined private companies developing expendable launch vehicles, ELVs. NASA's monopoly on launching payloads for both civilian and defense purposes meant there were fewer opportunities for commercial players. 3. Reopening the market. President Reagan's intervention. By the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan saw the need to reinvigorate the private space sector. In 1983, he endorsed the commercialization of U.S. expendable launch vehicles, ELVs, through a national policy known as NSDD 94. A year later, Congress passed the Commercial Space Launch Act to give private companies more opportunities in space transportation. This opened the door for companies like Space Service, Inc., which became the first to complete a commercial suborbital mission in 1989. Shortly thereafter, McDonnell Douglas launched a Delta I rocket in the first U.S. licensed commercial orbital launch. This marked the beginning of a new era in the launch industry, where private firms could compete alongside government programs. 4. Space Shuttle dominance and its consequences. Despite these advancements, NASA's Space Shuttle continued to dominate the U.S. launch market through the 1990s. Defense payloads, commercial satellites, and national security reconnaissance missions were all launched using the shuttle. The idea was to spread its high fixed costs over many launches to make it more cost-effective. However, a series of disasters, including the Columbia Shuttle disaster in 2003, forced policymakers to reconsider. After this disaster, the shuttle program was eventually phased out in 2010, leaving a gap in the U.S.'s ability to transport astronauts to space. 5. The rise of ULA and limited competition. During the shuttle era, private companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin vied for dominance in the launch market, but competition was limited. In 2006, the two companies formed a joint venture known as the United Launch Alliance, ULA. ULA held a near monopoly on national security launches, with expensive fixed contracts with the U.S. military. However, ULA's high costs, averaging $420 million per launch by 2014, left little room for competition. International players like Russia and China began offering lower-cost alternatives, challenging U.S. dominance in space. 6. A turning point, the Commercial Orbital Transportation System, COTS. In 2006, NASA launched the Commercial Orbital Transportation System, COTS, to subsidize private companies that could develop reusable launch vehicles. This move proved to be crucial for SpaceX, which received early funding through the COTS program. By 2010, the U.S. had canceled the shuttle program, and NASA started relying on companies like SpaceX for missions to the International Space Station, ISS. Space Exploration Technologies, SpaceX is a name synonymous with revolutionizing the space industry. But how did it all start? How did Elon Musk, a tech entrepreneur, turn SpaceX into a powerhouse that's reshaped the commercial space launch industry? Elon Musk's fascination with space began long before SpaceX. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk was inspired by science fiction novels like those of Isaac Asimov. These books ignited his passion to help prolong civilization and minimize the probability of a dark age. After moving to the U.S., Musk completed studies in economics and physics, but his journey into space exploration was not straightforward. Elon Musk's first major success came with XCOM, which later became PayPal. After selling PayPal to eBay for $1.5 billion in 2002, Musk had the financial capital to pursue his dream of space exploration. His first space-related venture was the Mars Oasis plan, a mission to send a small greenhouse to Mars. However, after failed negotiations with Russian rocket manufacturers, Musk famously remarked, "I think we can build a rocket ourselves." And so, SpaceX was born. Gwynne Shotwell, the unsung hero of SpaceX. But Musk wasn't alone. Enter Gwynne Shotwell, a space systems engineer with over a decade of experience. With a master's in mechanical engineering and applied mathematics, Shotwell had the technical knowledge and management skills that Musk needed. She joined SpaceX in 2002 as Vice President of Business Development and later became President and COO in 2008. Under Shotwell's leadership, SpaceX secured its first major government contract through NASA's Commercial Orbital Transportation System (COTS) program. This deal was crucial in transforming SpaceX from a fledgling company into a dominant player in the commercial launch industry, challenging the commercial launch industry, but SpaceX didn't enter a fair playing field. The U.S. launch market was dominated by two giants, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, who had created a joint venture called United Launch Alliance, ULA. For years, ULA had a monopoly on national security launches, and their launch costs had skyrocketed to an average of $420 million per flight. Elon Musk knew that the entrenched duopoly had stifled innovation and pushed prices to astronomical levels. Musk identified three key areas where SpaceX could disrupt the market: reusability, vertical integration, and cost-effective reliability. Reusability, the key to affordable space access. One of the biggest breakthroughs at SpaceX was the focus on reusability. Musk famously compared traditional rockets to airplanes, saying, "Throwing away multi-million-dollar rocket stages after every flight makes no more sense than chucking away a 747 after every flight." With Falcon 9, SpaceX became the first company to successfully reuse a rocket, drastically lowering the cost per launch. Imagine the difference this makes for companies and governments. Previously, every launch required a brand new rocket, costing hundreds of millions. SpaceX's reusable rockets brought those costs down significantly. Vertical integration, streamlining costs and production. Musk's second strategy was vertical integration. Unlike ULA, which relied on hundreds of subcontractors, SpaceX built most of its components in-house. This allowed SpaceX to maintain greater control over the production process, reduce costs, and avoid inefficiencies caused by subcontractor delays or markups. Cost-effective reliability, a new standard in spaceflight. Lastly, SpaceX focused on proving that low cost doesn't mean low reliability. As Musk once said, "A Ferrari is a very expensive car, but not reliable. A Honda Civic is cheap, and I'll bet you 1,000 to 1 it won't break down in the first year." This principle guided SpaceX's philosophy. SpaceX's Falcon 9 and Dragon spacecraft became synonymous with reliable, low-cost space transportation, making space more accessible to both commercial and government clients. By combining reusability, vertical integration, and cost-effective reliability, SpaceX revolutionized space access. What was once an industry dominated by a few players with sky-high costs has been transformed into a competitive marketplace where economies of scale are driving innovation. Today, SpaceX is not just another space company, it's a symbol of how disruptive technology and bold ideas can open new frontiers. And this is only the beginning. With missions to Mars and beyond on the horizon, SpaceX is proving that the future of space exploration is not just for governments, but for all of humanity. Introduction to SpaceX's product innovation. Today, we're diving into one of the most revolutionary companies of our time, SpaceX. Specifically, we'll be discussing how SpaceX tackled product development challenges head-on to disrupt the space industry. By exploring the development of its core products like the Falcon 1, Falcon 9, and Dragon spacecraft, we'll understand how economies of scale were achieved and how SpaceX revolutionized access to space. Let's begin with SpaceX's first major innovation, the Falcon 1. Falcon 1, the first step toward reusability. The Falcon 1 was SpaceX's first-ever launch vehicle, designed with the vision of making space travel more affordable and efficient. This small satellite launcher was powered by a single Merlin engine, capable of launching payloads of up to 470 kilograms into low Earth orbit, LEO. But, as with all great innovations, success didn't come immediately. The journey started with multiple failures. First attempt and failure. The first launch in March 2006, carrying a U.S. Air Force payload, ended in failure. The rocket crashed due to a plumbing issue. Second attempt and failure. 1 year later, in 2007, Falcon 1 failed again. This time, it was an issue with the separation between the first and second stages. Now, why is this important from a business or MBA perspective? These early failures may seem like setbacks, but SpaceX was not deterred. Instead, they upgraded their engine to Merlin 1C for better performance. By learning from their mistakes, SpaceX refined the Falcon 1's design and ultimately achieved success on their fourth attempt in 2008. Falcon 9 economies of scale in action. After Falcon 1, SpaceX set its sights higher, developing the Falcon 9, a game-changing rocket designed for medium and heavy payloads. The Falcon 9 not only improved upon Falcon 1's design, but it also marked the beginning of SpaceX's long-term vision of reusability and cost efficiency. Let's break down how this product was both innovative and cost-effective. 9 Merlin engines. The Falcon 9 used 9 Merlin engines, improving reliability and providing enough thrust to carry heavier payloads. Reusability. SpaceX aimed to reuse rocket components to drastically reduce costs. The development of the Falcon 9 also paved the way for the introduction of landing technology, something unheard of before in space travel. By reducing launch costs, SpaceX achieved economies of scale. This allowed the company to launch more frequently, learning from each mission while improving efficiency. For example, the cost to develop the Falcon 9 was reportedly around $300 million, much lower than traditional NASA projects, which often run into billions. NASA's Commercial Crew and Cargo programs, a catalyst for Falcon 9. In 2006, SpaceX secured its first NASA contract under the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services (COTS) program, marking the beginning of a long partnership. The COTS program allowed NASA to share costs with commercial partners, giving SpaceX the opportunity to develop the Falcon 9 with NASA's financial support. SpaceX would go on to receive over $5.2 billion in contracts from NASA under COTS, Commercial Resupply Services (CRS), and the Commercial Crew Program, CC-DEV. This funding was pivotal for SpaceX's growth, enabling them to develop key technologies like the Dragon spacecraft. Dragon spacecraft. Moving toward human spaceflight. The Dragon spacecraft was designed to support cargo missions to the International Space Station, ISS, and, later, human spaceflight. Initially developed under the Commercial Crew and Cargo programs, Dragon represented SpaceX's foray into the human spaceflight market. Dragon 1.0. Used primarily for cargo, this spacecraft could carry up to 6,000 kilograms to the ISS. Dragon Crew. Capable of carrying up to 7 astronauts, SpaceX's Dragon Crew was their solution for human spaceflight. With reusable technology at its core, the Dragon spacecraft wasn't just a cargo ship. It was a versatile platform that could carry crew, supplies, and even scientific experiments. Falcon Heavy, reaching new heights. As SpaceX continued to innovate, they introduced the Falcon Heavy, the most powerful rocket in the world. By using 3 cores from Falcon 9, SpaceX increased its payload capacity to 63,800 kilograms to LEO. What makes Falcon Heavy significant is its capability for heavy payload missions, including future human missions to the Moon and Mars. Its development showcased SpaceX's vision for not just lowering costs but enabling more ambitious missions. In February 2018, Falcon Heavy's maiden flight successfully launched a dummy payload, a Tesla Roadster, into space. This high-profile mission showcased the rocket's potential and attracted commercial interest, including contracts from the U.S. Department of Defense. SpaceX's journey through product development showcases how innovation, persistence, and strategic partnerships can enable companies to break into traditionally high-cost industries. By continuously refining its rockets, learning from failures, and scaling up operations, SpaceX has revolutionized space access. Introduction to SpaceX's market disruption. SpaceX started as just one player in the global commercial launch market. But by 2018, it captured over 60% of the market. Imagine that, a single company going from 10% to 60% in just 5 years. That's not just impressive, it's disruptive. But how did SpaceX manage to grow so rapidly while slashing prices for satellite launches? The answer lies in a concept familiar to business students: economies of scale. What are economies of scale? Economies of scale is a cost-saving strategy companies use by increasing production, allowing them to lower the average cost per unit. Let's break it down. Fixed costs are expenses that stay the same no matter how much you produce, like R&D or the cost of building a rocket. Variable costs change with the amount produced, like materials and labor. By producing more units, companies can spread their fixed costs over a larger number of products, which lowers the average cost per unit. Here's an example. Think of a pizza shop. Whether the shop sells 10 pizzas or 100, the cost to rent the building, fixed cost, remains the same. But as they sell more pizzas, the fixed cost per pizza decreases, making each pizza cheaper to produce. SpaceX's path to economies of scale. SpaceX's journey to scale wasn't just about building more rockets. It was about making rockets cheaper and more reusable. In fact, 60% of the Falcon 9's cost comes from the first stage of the rocket, and reusability played a key role in reducing that cost. SpaceX pioneered the use of reusable rocket stages, first by recovering and reusing the first stage of their Falcon 9 rockets. Instead of building a new rocket for every launch, SpaceX reuses the same rocket multiple times. This creates what we call a virtuous cycle. As they launch more rockets, their costs decrease, allowing them to lower prices and capture even more of the market. Let's take a closer look at how SpaceX's innovation in rocket design and reusability affected its costs. The Falcon 9 launch costs dropped significantly. SpaceX managed to cut costs by almost 10 times compared to traditional rockets. And what about competitors like Arianespace or ILS? They simply couldn't keep up with the price reductions. This cost advantage was achieved not just through reusability but also through vertical integration. SpaceX built almost everything in-house, from rocket engines to software. This allowed them to control costs at every stage and eliminate the markups from suppliers. The role of government contracts and fixed-price deals. A significant part of SpaceX's early success came from its partnership with NASA under the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services (COTS) program. Before COTS, NASA's contracts were often based on cost-plus models, meaning companies were reimbursed for their expenses with an added profit margin. This model didn't incentivize cost-saving innovations. However, under COTS, SpaceX competed for fixed-price contracts. This meant that if they could lower their costs, they could keep the extra profits. The result? SpaceX developed the Falcon 9 at just $300 million, while NASA estimated that building a similar rocket themselves would have cost $4 billion. Challenges of scaling and diseconomies of scale. While scaling brings cost benefits, it can also introduce challenges. Economists call this diseconomies of scale, when increasing production leads to inefficiency. SpaceX has managed to avoid this pitfall so far, but historically, many large organizations struggle as they grow too big, too fast. For example, companies like the Soviet Union's centralized economy or some large corporations in the 20th century faced rising complexity, bureaucracy, and inefficiencies as they scaled up. SpaceX, on the other hand, has kept a relatively lean organization, keeping overheads low and efficiency high. The future, SpaceX and the growth loop. Looking ahead, SpaceX is pushing to scale even further with projects like Starship, a fully reusable rocket designed to take humans to Mars. If SpaceX succeeds in making space travel routine and affordable, it will not only dominate the market but open up new possibilities for space tourism, research, and beyond. For MBA students, the lessons here are clear. By achieving economies of scale and embracing innovation, companies can disrupt entire industries and transform markets. SpaceX is a masterclass in using scale to revolutionize a sector and achieve long-term success. SpaceX is proof that mastering economies of scale can change the game, not just for companies, but for entire industries. Want to learn more about groundbreaking business strategies like this? Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more episodes from 5 Minutes Learning. Until next time, keep learning and keep aiming high.